Welcome to Everyday Conversations with Faith Beyond Belief. I'm your host, Shafer Parker, and with me today is a very special guest, Alex Schadenberg. Alex is the international chairman of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. And Alex, welcome to the program.
Shafer, it's great to be with you and to discuss these issues. Some of these issues are not so nice to talk about, but I think it's important to have these discussions.
I couldn't agree more. On one level, you wish we never had to talk about them, but here we are because we're being forced to.
Well, the prime example is euthanasia. 30 years ago, if you had thought Canada be where it is today, you would say, no way, we can envision maybe that the country was going to legalize euthanasia, as crazy as that is. But where we are today, we would have thought, no, that wouldn't happen. That's just beyond belief. And yet here we are today.
Yeah, and I was going to take a slightly different beginning point for this discussion, but since you've said that, where we are today, why don't you just start with that? We'll get to the main point in a moment, but maybe this is good background. Tell us where we are today.
Well, the thing about today is that we have euthanasia in Canada that was legalized in 2016 after the Carter Supreme Court decision in 2015. And when the current government legalized euthanasia, they did so without definitions within the law. So when you read the law, it was more about the idea that we're going to have some sort of controls over this, not the reality that there would actually be control. The law was designed to expand from the beginning, so it lacked definition. I'll give you the prime example. The prime example was that the law said in the beginning that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable, and the government sold that as being some sort of idea that it would be for terminally ill people, but in fact, it never defined it. So,
yeah.
What did it actually mean that your natural death was reasonably foreseeable? But that only lasted until 2019 when a lower court in Quebec struck down that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. It was a lower court that was during the election. So the Liberals, instead of appealing the decision, which would have been a normal course of action, in fact, it is the course of action that happens not most of the time, it happens all of the time on any serious public issue, and certainly euthanasia is a serious public issue. And anyway, it was not appealed. They accepted the lower court decision, which was the Truchon decision, which struck down that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. And then, of course, they went ahead and expanded euthanasia by this Bill C7, which took place in March of 2021. That law now essentially means that a person has to have an irremediable medical condition to die by euthanasia. Mm-hmm. What does that mean, Shafer? I don't know. It's not defined. Irremediable would tend to mean that you have a chronic condition or a long-term chronic condition. But if you don't define it, what does it mean? Because there's lots of people who have, how would you say, health conditions which are completely not terminal, but have significant effect upon them. But if you look at an irremediable medical condition, certainly a diabetes would qualify under that, even if it's managed. So, when you start looking at it, we have a very wide law. It essentially also means that anyone with a disability in Canada now qualifies for euthanasia. So when they did that, they created a two-tier law. So they said, so if you're not terminally ill, you'd have a 90-day waiting period. So let's say you were someone who had a chronic medical condition, a chronic disability, and you were approved to be killed by euthanasia, which is lethal injection. Mm-hmm. Homicide is actually, just so you know, when we legalized euthanasia in Canada, what we did is we created an exception in our criminal code to homicide. So the Homicide Act was, it looks the same until you look below the next line and you realize, oh, we've created an exception to homicide. If you're a doctor or nurse practitioner, you can kill someone. That's what it essentially means. It's crazy as that sounds, it's true.
Yeah.
They say, Alex, it's not murder. It's medical aid in dying. Well, first of all, medical aid in dying was a term we created in Canada to make you feel good about killing. But secondly, even the criminal code recognizes that it's homicide. We just created an exception to it. But let's move on. The law also then, what it did is it said there'd be no waiting period if you're deemed that your natural death is reasonably foreseeable, which is still not defined. So you have a type of a terminal condition, and there's lots of terminal conditions which are not, in any way immediately terminal. You would then qualify for a same-day death if that's what you asked for. You could come in the morning and say, I'm having a really, really bad day. I'd like to have MAiD. I can't afford a MAiD myself, Shafer, so I don't have any MAiDs at my house. But nonetheless, I know. It's a bad joke. Glad you laughed at it. You're getting as old as me, maybe. Anyway, Anyway,
No.
the point of it is then you could have a same day death, whereas if you're not considered terminally ill, you would have a 90-day waiting period. And they also at that time legalized euthanasia for mental illness, but they created a 2-year moratorium on it because they said that they weren't ready to kill people with mental illness, and then they added an extra year of a moratorium to it. So it's now March of 2024 that they're going to start killing people with mental illnesses. Now, what does this mean? This means that we've seen these cases of people with disabilities who are poor, living in poverty, people with disabilities who are homeless, people with disabilities who are having difficulty getting medical treatment, which is not
Yeah.
new. It's been a problem for a long time in our system. These
Right.
people have been approved for euthanasia. They're dying by euthanasia, and we're shocked by it. And we're looking at this saying, well, this can't be true. We couldn't have passed that in Canada. Canada is far more progressive than that, and yet that's exactly what's going on. And now, this recent case that came out of a woman who is a quadriplegic woman. She became quadriplegic when she was 17, but she has been running a business, and now she's in her early 30s. Since then, she actually is married with 3 kids. Since then, recently she's become fairly sick. She's had some serious health problems, so she's applied for disability benefits. But she's been working all these years. She's written books.
Taxes.
She's been paying tax. Yeah, absolutely. But now she's sick, so she's applied for disability benefits in Ontario, and she's learned that it takes 6 to 8 months to be approved for disability benefits. But she has no money now, and she's saying, "I've been approved for MAiD."
Yeah.
She's been approved for euthanasia. She's got a few days left before her 90 days is up and they can kill her. And she says she still has not received word from the Ontario government about her disability benefits. And yet at the same time, she's a quadriplegic, so obviously she qualifies. You don't have to do a big medical test when you're quadriplegic.
No.
She's has no income because of her illness that she's been experiencing, and she's approved for MAiD. She might just die by MAiD in a few days, rather than the government saying, oh, I guess you qualify, let's give you some disability benefits. This is the kind of thing we're in for right now.
Yeah. Now does what you've just described, am I exaggerating to say, to me this just feels like evil? Is that too strong a word?
Well, I personally don't think it's too strong a word, but that's a whole nother point of view, isn't it? I guess for the average person, you would say that this has gone way out of control. This is, we're talking about life and death here, Shafer. So I guess you can definitely say this is evil because, these are people who need clear help. This is, if you're truly a progressive society and you want to be a progressive society, you're going to help the most vulnerable in your culture. And you might debate issues around benefits for people who have questionable circumstances, whatever they might be. And that, whatever, that's a debate you can have. But when someone clearly has a disability and is clearly in need, why would we be arguing about this? It'd be a pretty, it'd be a society that really lacks, how would you say, compassion, which provides no help or hope for these people. And of course, what we're doing is we're killing them. We've approved killing them, and there's no question about it. The other side argues, the pro-euthanasia lobby argues, well, this is okay because they do qualify for euthanasia. And if you look at the law, absolutely, this person has an irremediable medical condition. They have a form of suffering. So they do qualify. There's no argument or question about the fact that they qualify under our wide, expansive law. No problem. I agree, they qualify. But the point of it is they're not actually asking to die because of their disability. They're asking to die because they can't live this way. Now let's go one step further.
Another point that the government that no human being should be so eager to help them to die, because as you said, it all fits under a special qualification within the criminal code.
Well, yes. So here's been the problem, Shafer. We created an exception to the criminal code, but because we assign that doctors are going to be the killers, doctors and nurse practitioners are going to be the killers, it's being treated like a medical act, even though it's not a medical act. The law did not define it as a medical act. It's being dealt with through the criminal code. But because it's deemed in our society as being a medical act, because we're having doctors and nurse practitioners do it. Now let's be honest. It doesn't take a doctor to kill you.
Well, no.
It's not that difficult a thing to do to you. If you have the drugs in place and a little bit of practice, anybody could kill you if they had access to those drugs.
You don't even have to worry about sterilizing the injection point, do you? Because they're going to be gone too soon for that to be an issue.
Well, you must have been watching what's it called, Babylon Bee, because they that was one of their jokes they had. The doctor got in trouble for not sterilizing the needle in euthanasia.
No, I did not. I didn't
of course,
see that.
Babylon Bee, the joke. Babylon Bee's a joke site, but the fact of it is a lot of their jokes are funny because there's some reality to it. Anyway.
No, I love the Babylon Bee, and I recommend that Christians who have any sense of humor should.
Anyway, let's get back to it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, the fact of it is that's because it's dealt as a medical treatment issue. Therefore, they're saying there's a type of a right to it, or there's a type of an access issue to it. And of course, this should be seen. If you're going to be killing people, you should be very careful with it. And they say, oh, yes, we are careful. But in fact, it's not careful at all. It's not careful whatsoever. Doctors and nurses, first of all, should not be killers in society ever, because we depend on them to be caregivers. And so when I'm needing care and I'm going through a very difficult time in my life, I shouldn't be going to someone who's going to kill me. I'll make one other comment about that. We have to understand, I know in the modern society this is hard to accept, but the fact of it is, as human beings, we're not computers. I know that sounds funny for me to say it, but really, we're human beings. Yeah. And as human beings, we go through emotional, psychological, spiritual, all these sort of, feelings that become, a huge problem for us at times when we're dealing with, let's say, end-of-life conditions or chronic conditions, etc. And we might be very down at times. We might be emotionally distraught. We might be questioning our purpose for living. And there's nothing new about that. There's nothing new in history about that. But except for in the modern day, we say autonomy is our king. But how do you define autonomy? Autonomy is our king. But if I'm at the downtime of my life, should not society be protecting me? Even from myself at times? Yeah. Absolutely. We always accepted that throughout history, that was necessary. Sure. Because we knew we were human. But now we've rejected it. So we've turned everything upside down. Everything doesn't make sense anymore. It's all a weird mixture of nonsensical decision making because of the fact that we've turned upside down the nature of what it means to be human and our experience as human persons within the realm of our lives. So this is what's really crazy about euthanasia. Right. What happens is you get in the end what you never expected, because the whole thing doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, so you could generalize, I think, by saying that within the federal government of Canada and within the governments of too many of our provinces, there's a kind of a pro-death or a leaning toward, prejudice toward death as an acceptable option when you've got a problem with somebody's physical body or even their emotional state and mental state and so forth. Now, that being the case, that means then that sometimes some people have had, they're in care of some sort. Maybe they're in some kind of a nursing home or something, and then all of a sudden it begins to be clear that they're moving this person toward some form of euthanasia, some form of medical aid in dying or something of that sort. So assistance in dying. So you've developed, and I want to get to this now because I don't want to put it too deep into the program, since we're advertising that this is sort of why we're having this discussion.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you've been offering something called a power of attorney for healthcare document that people can use to protect themselves against overeager, sadly enough, overeager relatives who would love to move you down that path or help in moving you down that path. Or
undereager physicians who are not willing to provide the basic care that you need.
Exactly.
Because they look at you and say, what's the point of that?
Exactly that. Yeah. So I know that in the article that I read that you wrote and published in your newsletter, there was an actual event. Now I know you can't use names and give away the details, but there was an actual event that sort of sparked your consideration of urging people to use this document, this legal document. So before we get to the legal document itself, why don't you tell the story that led to your writing the article that I saw?
Okay, so I better clarify first. The life-protecting power of attorney for personal care is something we developed several years ago, but it's evolved over time as the law changed. Nonetheless, the story was of a woman who was quite upset. I didn't say in the story a woman, but she was a woman, upset because her parent, who she had been the caregiver for, was now ill and in the hospital. So she's the caregiver. She has other siblings, but she has been the caregiver. Her parent is ill and in the hospital, and a sibling has the power of attorney rights. So the parent had assigned her sibling as the power of attorney. Right. Now she's in a situation where the sibling has decided that the parent is going to be approaching death anyway, which may or may not be true. Nonetheless, the sibling has decided that we're not continuing with any, what you would call basic treatment, even treatment which is of benefit to this parent. And the problem is that we get the phone call because this person is very upset, saying, I don't think my parent is dying anytime soon, but if this continues, my parent will be dying very soon. But on top of it, they're saying this was not in their best interests. And on top of it, this would not have fit the values of my parent. What can I do to overcome the power of attorney in this case? And the reality is you can't do anything unless you can actually prove in a court that the person who's making medical decisions is not making decisions in the best interest of that person. Now, here's the difficulty. Those are not easy things to prove whatsoever unless actually there's clear negligence, so there's clear issues here. And in this case, sometimes things become a little bit fuzzy when you're dealing with a parent who has some health issues, and they are also elderly. And often in the medical world, they would say, well, why would you provide treatment to that person anyway? Now, you have to come from the point of view also, like there is some real moral questions here. Like you're not obligated to accept medical treatment. So if you Shafer's in the hospital and the doctor's saying, we can do A, B, and C to help you in the situation, or we can do nothing at all, you might feel like, well, at this time of my life, I'm choosing nothing at all. And there's nothing morally wrong with that because no one's actually killing you.
Right.
If you were to die, like you may not die, right? You may continue living. You might actually thrive and get better. It's possible. But the point of it is if you were to die, it would be a natural death. And we recognize that no one actually killed you. And it's your right to do this. But in the case of a power of attorney document, the person you're making medical decisions for is now deemed to be incompetent. These documents only come into power when you're deemed incompetent. So when I'm doing talks, and I do a lot of talks all over the place, I do, about 75 talks a year. I always tell people when you appoint someone as your power of attorney for personal care, only appoint someone who shares your values.
Yes.
Don't appoint your oldest daughter or oldest son if they do not share your values, because you're giving them the right to make medical decisions for you when you can't make decisions for yourself. Now, the life-protecting power of attorney for personal care that we developed is a little bit different from that. Yes, the document fulfills the legal requirements. It allows you to appoint someone to make medical decisions for you. It does so in exactly the way that the law requires. And it also allows you, which what the law also requires, it states within it certain values that we are assigning. Now, you can change the document if you feel that we're a bit too stringent, but I don't think we're too stringent at all. What we've done is essentially saying that someone wants beneficial treatment. So anything that's of benefit you want. If the treatment becomes, let's say, very difficult on the person, let's say there's a fair amount of burden involved in that treatment, then the person who you've appointed as the power of attorney for personal care can decide at that time whether or not that treatment would continue. Now, remember, these are the same type of decisions you would make if you're competent, but if you become incompetent, someone's got to make those decisions for you. The other thing is we make it very clear that you do not want to die by dehydration. This has become quite common in our culture. I hate to say this to you. Dying by dehydration has become almost like the accepted way of dying for elderly people. You go into the hospital, you have these medical conditions, and they say, well, we're going to put you in palliative care. We're going to withdraw all treatments, which includes then food and fluids. And I'm not saying palliative care is a bad thing, but I'm saying it can be abused. And then you die of dehydration. So they keep you drugged enough that you're not suffering, but in fact, they're causing your death by dehydration.
If I could
and then, of course,
for a second, that leads me to ask you another question.
Which is not considered legally euthanasia. Legally, that's not defined as euthanasia. No.
Which is crazy. It just feels wrong anyway. But you have said it's very important that you choose the person who's going to represent you, your child, whoever has power of attorney. That person needs to share your values. It might be that we should encourage people, and I'm asking this in the form of a question, should we also be encouraging people to work just as hard to find a hospice, if they're ever going to have to go to one, a hospice that shares their values as well?
Okay, the answer to that question is yes. But Shafer, that's becoming very difficult now that euthanasia is legal in Canada. Hospice has changed massively since 2016. And it's not because hospice intended to change massively. It's because the law legalized euthanasia, and then it became treated as if it were medical treatment. And because hospices receive money from the government, therefore they're being told
what they have to do.
Now, they're not in every province ordered to do euthanasia, but it's becoming that way, that in almost everywhere you go, the hospice is providing also euthanasia. Now, sorry about that, but when a hospice gets involved with killing people and not just helping them die a natural death, it changes everything about the hospice. It changes everything about how the staff view you. It changes everything about the concept of maybe this person, sometimes in hospice, you might be there on the 10th and 11th day and they're wondering, why is this guy here so long? Was he not actually dying? As funny as that might be, there are some people who actually graduate from hospice. It's getting harder to graduate from hospice, meaning that you weren't actually dying. You might have been very sick at the time, but you actually started getting better. And anyway, the point of it is hospice has changed massively. What I do say is that for a power of attorney for personal care, if you have a son or a daughter who shares your values, whether that be the oldest child or the youngest child, wouldn't matter. That's the one you appoint to make medical decisions for you. How you appoint someone to deal with your finances, because that's a different power of attorney document. There's a power of attorney for your finances, power of attorneys for your healthcare. That could be a totally different person, and that's fine with me. What happens to your finances is your own business. But in the case of your healthcare, of course, that is also your own business. But I mean, you're giving someone a lot of power over your life and death, and you better make sure that they share your values. I'll go one step further. Our document makes it very clear that you do not want euthanasia. You do not want assisted suicide. And on top of it, we put on it, even if you should ask for it, treat that as a request for pain and symptom management. So I'm recognizing very clearly that even somebody who clearly does not want euthanasia or assisted suicide might be going through such an existential angst or such a psychological depression that they want a way out, and they're experiencing suicidal ideation. And I know for a fact, whether you like it or I like it, that's always been part of our human condition, that people experience suicidal ideation. And I would hate that someone who would never have wanted euthanasia or assisted suicide in the end is asking for someone to kill them and it actually be granted, when in fact what they were looking for is pain and symptom management.
Right, exactly. Okay, so you've got the power of attorney document. How can people how can they get hold of these things? It's actually called the power of attorney for healthcare document, right?
So, yeah, that's right. Well, you would contact us. Now I've sent out the article. You can get it through our website. You can email us, info@epcc.ca, info@epcc.ca. You can phone us at our toll-free number. Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, we're easy to find. You Google us, we come up like very fast. We're not hard to find at all. The fact of it is, as I say, you can go to the resource section on our website. You can, as I say, you can email us, you can contact us, you can phone us. We're not hiding. We're not going to hide very far. And we only charge $10 plus tax for it, which is $10.50. Now, someone recently asked me, Alex, why are you charging for this, knowing that this can really save someone's life? And I'm saying, well, it's only $10. If you went to a lawyer for a similar document, first of all, it wouldn't necessarily contain the language of our document, which was very, we spent a lot of time making sure that the language was correct. But secondly, the lawyer would charge you minimally a couple $100, and we're charging you $10 to save your life. I guess you can afford $10 plus tax to save your life. But on top of it, we're a nonprofit. Like the government's not begging to give us money or anything like that. They're giving over $3 million a year to the main euthanasia lobby group, the group that's lobbying them for expansion. They're giving over $3 million a year to them. Yeah. And they gave them charitable status. We don't have charitable status because
that major corporations can also pour tens and even hundreds of thousands of dollars into that organization.
Absolutely, because everything is pro killing. We're a nonprofit. So sorry, we're asking $10 to save your life. I think it's pretty cheap. Nothing personal. I think it's worth a heck of a lot more than that. But that's what we're charging in order to. And they say yes. And then someone recently asked me a question because I was promoting this a little bit, and they said, well, what's the difference between this and one of those free documents you can get from off the website from the government, things like that? I said, well, the format's identical. The difference is those free documents come with nothing in them, and you've got to fill it out yourself. And language is everything. Let me give you an example. If you put in your document that if you were approaching death, you would want no further treatment, only comfort care.
Right.
Simple statement. Now, there is a time in life, as you're approaching death, you might say, I don't want any more treatment. I've accepted the limits of my life. I accepted I'm approaching death. It's okay. I don't want treatment, but I do want to be kept comfortable. So
Sure.
there's nothing ridiculous about the statement other than the fact that you have to understand that food and fluids have now been defined as medical treatment. So
Yes.
if you put in there, I want no further medical treatment, only comfort care, you're actually asking to be dehydrated to death. And you don't know that unless you actually know the language, and language is everything. And that's how I did respond to that person. I said, language is everything. So if you understand that the language has to be crafted in such a way as to protect your life, then you would realize that $10 is cheap.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So according to what you're saying, then your document will include a clear statement that you want fluids and you want food until your natural death.
Well, in this case, so you're actually imminently dying, because obviously there's a reality of the body.
Okay,
Part of the
sure,
dying
shutting
process
down.
is your body starts shutting down. That's correct.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's totally normal. And at that point, there's no purpose for putting any fluids or food in that body. Obviously, keeping your mouth from drying up and etc. That sort of care of the body is necessary. But I mean, no, why would you put food or fluids in a body that's actually shutting down? There's no purpose to that.
Of course. Now, you did say this a while ago, but I want to say it again just to make sure that this is very clear to our listeners and those who are watching. And that would be that there is when a person is dying, and you simply, and they at their request, or when it no longer makes any sense to do otherwise, we cease to give them food or something of that sort, and let the body take its natural course. To let someone die is different from causing someone to die. Causing someone to die is a moral question, whereas letting someone die is just putting them in God's hands. And the reason I say that is because I'm keenly aware of what happened to my own mother. She was 59 years old. This was back in 1984. She was 59 years old, and she had a cerebral hemorrhage, and the bleeding was so rapid and so massive inside her brain that she was, within about 10 hours of the beginning of it, she was completely incapacitated. Her brain, even her brain stem, had ceased to function, and she was on, her heart was still beating, but her lungs were not naturally breathing. And so for about 48 hours, she was on a heart-lung machine or on a respirator just to stay alive. And so after that period, the doctor asked my father, who was there with us, and we're standing around the bed, and he said, she's not breathing on her own. If we turn that machine off, she will stop breathing immediately. And what do you want us to do? And my father, being a really committed Christian, devoted Christian, put in his language, he said, I want you to put her in God's hands. And the doctor understood that, and he turned off the respirator. She never drew another breath. And in less than a minute, her body had ceased. But you could look at the person and you could tell that there was nobody there already. Her spirit had flown the body, you might say. And so they stopped. That is not wrong to allow a body to die. What is wrong is to cause a body to die.
So now you're bringing up the issue of brain death, because clearly your mother had experienced brain death. She had such a neurological effect upon the brain bleed that her brain had stopped functioning. And her body, her remaining body activity only continued mechanically. And so allowing her to go, in fact, she technically probably had gone already. Her body was just being kept alive. And that's a very clear situation.
You need to talk about brain death for a few minutes, if you don't mind. I think that's a very important topic.
Well, everything's now up for grabs with brain death, because this whole, it starts with the whole question of organ donation. So, you've had a lot of pressure that someone be declared brain dead in order to gain organs quicker and healthier, meaning the healthiest organs are the ones that continue to be alive, right? So therefore, if your heart is beating, that heart is a good organ for donation. But if your heart stops beating, then it starts deteriorating and it stops being a great organ for donation. So you have to understand how this works. So they do try and keep, when someone has agreed to be an organ donor, they try and keep the body parts as fresh and healthy and operating as long as possible. But now we've had this whole question of brain death, which has been going on since 1968, this definition, which always was a problem because how do you actually determine someone to be brain dead? In the case of your mother, it was it was easier to determine that because, in fact, she had such a brain bleed that it would be it's almost impossible that she was still having some brain function. And if it was, allowing her to die naturally, which is what you did, it wouldn't have taken very long for everything to simply be ended. But now they're redefining brain death right now. This whole question. So right now in the US, there's this big debate. And I didn't realize, I've been part of this all-American debate with this Uniform Determination of Death Act in the US. So there's this big debate.
And you report on this, by the way, on your website, do you not?
On my blog and everything. I've been writing about this, yes. And so they're trying to redefine brain death. And I didn't realize actually that that issue actually started here in Canada. So I had a couple of questions to me. Well, would this affect Canada if the Americans redefine brain death? And I said, sadly, in Canada, they would jump all over it so fast that, you wouldn't even have known that there had been a different definition of brain death because we're, I don't think we're progressive. I think we're regressive here. I think it's the opposite because we're so quick to say, oh, that's good. Now we can kill so-and-so. And you're saying, Alex, you're being flippant. I'm thinking, I wish I were flippant. That would be very nice if I were flippant because then at least you could take me less serious because you should take this very serious. So right now with the Uniform Determination of Death Act in the US, they're debating the changes to that act. And there's a big committee that's working on this thing. And the question is when are you brain dead? And so now there's this whole group that's saying that coma would be therefore, if you've been in coma for a period of time, we could define that as brain dead. If you seem to have an irreversible brain injury, meaning that even if you're not dead, you're not getting better and you're almost impossibly going to get better. Therefore, we can define that as brain dead. Now, why do they want to do this? It's the whole connection to the organ donation situation, because obviously there's a greater demand for organs than a supply for organs for organ donation. Therefore, by creating an ability to have more organs available for donation, then you can try and meet the demand for organ donation. And so they're saying, well, these people are going to die anyway.
Right.
But in fact, they're not dead.
No.
Now, here's a sad thing: is I did receive an article from Dr. Schumann in California. Dr. Schumann is a famous neurologist. He's quite well known worldwide. And he sent me an article that the Canadian Medical Association Journal has recently published this whole study on brain death in Canada and criteria, etc. It appears that we've been experimenting with this for a while already in Canada. And actually, if you look at the Nova Scotia law on this, so in 2019, the Nova Scotia government changed their organ donation law. They had the law on death and organ donation, etc. And in that, clearly they were predicting that there was going to be a change to this brain death definition, because in the one section, I believe it was section 19, it refers to this, it says, if you are declared dead or, and then it, irreversible, which is only a little line in there. But that little line is powerful because it means that if they were to accept that in Nova Scotia, you can go ahead and start removing organs from someone who's technically not dead because it's been determined that they're irreversible, right? Which would be and this is the kind of thing, and I didn't realize that was there. I did know that same Nova Scotia bill in 2019 was the bill that had allowed for organ donation based on assumed consent. So that's the bill when they changed the law, saying that if you have not declared that you do not want to be a donor, so in Nova Scotia, you have to declare, I am not a donor.
Right. Otherwise,
if you don't say I'm not a donor, then you are a donor. So the problem with that, obviously, is that if you're, I don't think it matters too much to you, Shafer, nothing personal, but if you were a 19-year-old who just got into a motorcycle accident, the whole organ donation team would be pretty excited by seeing your body. And I shouldn't be saying that, but it's true. I'm so sorry to say how true it is. You won't have it. Are all doctors and nurses changed in their ethics? The answer is no. Have some changed their ethics? The answer is yes.
And aren't all doctors and nurses under pressure to change their ethics, under extraordinary pressure? Okay, absolutely. So maybe they have, and we just don't know it.
And the modern day education system on ethics is based on Peter Singer's philosophy. And Peter Singer doesn't have any problem with euthanasia. He doesn't have any problem with infanticide. He doesn't have any problem, of course, with any type of abortion, etc., whatever. And this is what's influenced our whole ethical system. When I say this to you, I'm sadly saying that whether I like it or not, look up his name, Peter Singer. I've written about him lately too. I've written about Peter Singer for years, but lately I wrote about him because he's got a new book tour. Anyway, and Peter Singer is his philosophy is very eugenic, and yet he's the leading philosopher of our day. I wish he weren't, but he is.
And speaking of eugenics, did I read this in something you wrote or something that you linked to? I'm not sure right this minute where I saw this, but apparently, one of the things that the progressive wing of our world wants to emphasize is that we are not racists. We are we're for equality between the races and so forth. And by the way, no Christian should ever be a racist. All Christians should be, red and yellow, black and white. That we should, to the degree I can even use those terms, but that they're all precious in God's sight, and because we're all children of Adam, so we don't have a problem. Christianity is fundamentally anti-racism. But having said that, there seems to be so many places where a kind of systemic racism does come up. For example, in the number of abortions among Black people, percentage-wise compared to white people. But also on the other end, I just recently saw that Blacks are far more often declared brain dead before they're not necessarily, when they're still not necessarily brain dead, and that whites more often receive transplanted organs.
Organs,
yeah. So there seems to
also
be
also with the medical treatment question, not only then are they declared brain dead more often, etc., but also in the whole question of being told that there's no further treatment for you, there's nothing more we could do for you. That sometimes is true. Like, obviously I could have cancer and it comes to a point where there's nothing more you can do to help me. It's gone beyond the point. I will die. The question is when and etc. But a Black person is far more likely to be denied treatment than a white person in the U.S. And the data is very strong on that side. And when you looked at what happened during COVID, that one case of the guy in Texas who was a man who was I'm not sure if he was a quadriplegic or just it was his legs. I'm not sure exactly to what degree his disability was, but he was a disabled guy who had COVID, etc. And they denied him any treatment whatsoever. He ended up dying. And of course, the disability movement went crazy about this. How could you have done that to him? Because he was a disabled man. That's the only reason you put him through this. And he had a family and everything. And if you start thinking about it, he actually had the 2 strikes against him. He was a disabled man, and just people with disabilities are always telling us, and if you look at the data, they're right, how they have such a hard time getting medical treatment. They have to demand that they receive medical treatment. They should always have an advocate, people with disabilities, because they're having to fight for the equality of receiving the treatment that they need. And I'm not even talking about extraordinary treatment now.
No,
I'm talking about the treatment. I had a friend who was a guy who had dwarfism. And he was quite concerned about this issue of euthanasia. So we had spoken quite often. He developed a hernia. He had to fight to get treatment for a hernia.
One of the most ordinary surgeries in the world.
And he's like,
hernia repair.
Why? Of course, he had multiple comorbidities with his dwarfism. You can see how dwarfism would cause problems with your skeletal nature and everything else. You can understand that as a human being, but at the same time, he had a hernia, and he's saying, Alex, I cannot believe how hard I've had to fight just to have treatment for this hernia. And they just wanted to give me analgesics, painkillers, right? That's all they wanted to do. And this is exactly what people with disabilities are experiencing all the time. And that's the other good reason to have a power of attorney for personal care that protects your life, but also to have a power of attorney for personal care that appoints somebody. And also have an advocate. We talk about advocacy as being so important. And the reason is let's say you are a person with a disability and you're going to go to a doctor, and it's a doctor you don't know. I'm not saying all doctors are terrible people. I'm not saying that at all, but they're looking at you from the eyes of a physician thinking, how am I going to cure you? But they're not thinking that maybe I can't cure this person because they have a disability. It's not the disability I can cure, but they have another health issue that I will help them with. Right. But they don't think that way. They're thinking always of because they're trained in the curative model.
My friend Heidi Jans, do you know Heidi?
I know Heidi. Edmonton. That's exactly it. Heidi's alive today because people care about her and have defended her. Because every time she gets seriously sick, they're wondering why do you want treatment? Then she has to always make sure people tell them that she's a professor. She
Yes,
has
that
her
she has
doctorate.
yeah, an
She,
earned
you
doctorate.
know, she's a seriously important person
Yes.
to the rest of Canada. If you realize the things that Heidi's done,
She's a
and yes,
disability advocate, at the highest
absolutely.
level. Yeah.
And the disability movement does not get the credit they deserve. And the fact of it is they're demanding treatment. So let's get back to this euthanasia thing one last time.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Bill C-7, I told you, legalized euthanasia for mental illness. And as of March of 2024, that's going to come into place in Canada.
Right.
I don't see there being an election between now and March of 2024. There might be, but that's it's going to take to stop that from happening. Euthanasia for mental illness. Now,
would an election make a difference? I mean, would a change of government really make a difference?
Well, it depends on how radical that changes, but you're right. It could very well not make a difference. It depends on who wins and how well they win, but nonetheless, I understand. And I'm not here to tell people how to vote, but I'm telling you that your current government is pretty pro-euthanasia.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, they've written the laws, right? It's this government that has written all the laws that we're now suffering from.
And I'm pointing out that they not only legalized euthanasia, which the court sort of forced them to do in a sense, but they did so without definitions. So it's a very wide law. It's very wide law. If you create a law without definitions, of course, what happens, it becomes defined by its practice, which is what we've seen happen. Anyway, getting back to it, look at the people with disabilities who have been saying, I can't get medical treatment, therefore I died by euthanasia, or I'm living in deep poverty because of the disability rates, and it's impossible to find a place to live and to actually live,
yes.
And you can understand they're actually not lying to you.
Reported on some of that here at Faith Beyond Belief. So go ahead.
It's absolutely true. Or they're saying that, I'm homeless already. Now think about people with mental illness. Look at the problem we're having with homelessness in our country. And, I live in the city of London. We've got a lot of homelessness in the city of London, a lot more than we've ever had before. Yeah. And there's lots of reasons for it, but one of the big reasons for it is issues related to mental health and addictions. Addictions and mental health are big reasons for homelessness. Not the only reason, but clearly big reasons. And now you're going to extend euthanasia to people with mental illness. A lot of these people have chronic long-term health needs that are not being met at all.
Right.
So if you're thinking about how bad it is now with euthanasia for people with disabilities who are, living in poverty, saying I'm experiencing homelessness. I can't seem to get medical treatment. I'm trying, but I can't get medical treatment, but they'll give me MAiD and they'll give it to me the same day even because of my medical condition. Think about this. And now you add mental illness to the mix and realize further, a lot of waiting lines for good mental health care in Canada, depending on what city you're in, can be very long, very, very, very long. So, if you consider how the law is designed with that two-tier law, that if you're not dying and it's a 90-day waiting period, in most cities in Canada, it's going to take more than 90 days to get your mental health care or be able even to see a psychiatrist or psychologist. Sure. You could be dead in 90 days. You start thinking about this, how ridiculous this is. I think killing's all wrong. I'm opposed to killing people, but I mean, when you consider the nature of how this law is, it's insanity. I'm sorry to say, guys, we're living in an insane culture.
Yes. Yes.
And it's because one of the reasons is because we've allowed killing. When you allow killing, everything becomes upside down. So.
Well, should our listeners then think toward the next election, whenever that takes place, that they should go to meetings and go to debates or wherever they can get and write letters and ask the question, what will you do about the finalization of Bill C-7? Is that the right way to formalize that question, or?
Well, they should say they're concerned about euthanasia for mental illness, and are wondering if this person gets elected, would they be willing to vote to reverse that? Exactly. And the fact of it is that that to me is a key question. There's lots of things that need to actually be done in order to curtail what we've got. But the fact of it is that if you vote the same way you voted before, you're going to get what you deserve. Nothing personal. We're not a charity, as I already told you. The government won't let us be a charity. If I were the leader of Dying with Dignity, I not only could have a charitable number for my organization, I could not only be lobbying the government myself, taking hospitals to court, doing all these kind of things. I could also be a charity, and I could say what I want politically, because of course I would be the favored charity being involved with killing. But as the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, we're a nonprofit. I'm free to say what I want.
Good for you. And
But I'm not going to tell you how to vote. I'm not going to do that. I think you should be mature enough to know that we need change
let
bad.
people figure that out for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, we're probably coming to an end now. Thank you you've just shared so much, Alex, and I appreciate that very much. But let's make sure that people know where to get this power of attorney document one more time. So you mentioned your website.
You come to the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. You can call us. Go to our website if you're having a hard time finding it. Actually, we should just move the link to it to the front page. We should probably just do that. I'll ask Emily to make the change. That would make it really easy because it's in the resources. And the second thing is you can email us at info@epcc.ca. You can call us at 1-877-439-3348. All this contact information is easy to find. You Google us. We're not hard to find. We're not hiding. Right. We're not trying to be difficult to find.
Absolutely. Euthanasia Prevention Coalition.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. This has been hugely informative. I hope in one sense inspiring. That is, inspiring people to action, because we've got to do something to defend life at the high end. You know, we're accustomed as Christians to defending life at the beginning. Now we need to defend life at the other end, from conception to natural death. And
it's become incumbent now with the laws the way they are, that you need to be caring for your friends and your family members. You need to be a central part of their lives, because you have to understand, as a human being, you need somebody there in your time of need to actually say, no, euthanasia is not a good idea. I'll be there. I'll help you.
Thank you so much. God bless, and God bless your work.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.